Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in the sub-region of Gualtallary in southern Mendoza, and we're looking at the Zorzal 2018 Eggo Franco Cab Franc. Zorzal Wines was established in 2008 by the Michelini brothers Gerardo, Mathias, and Juan Pablo, and the winery spans 70 hectares in the region of Gualtallary in the Uco Valley. And by Argentinian standards, I would consider this a boutique winery. The production hovers around 300,000 bottles per year. Now, Mathias Michelini is one of the great pioneers in this region. He was one of the earliest proponents of picking grapes on the earlier side in order to achieve greater freshness and higher acidities in the finished wines. And in terms of his influence here, he has been instrumental in a number of premium winemaking projects here in Gualtallary, but it's his brother Juan Pablo who is the winemaker at Zorzal, and he is assisted in the cellar by Noelia Juri. So the Uco Valley, we are in the southern part of Mendoza. We're about 80 kilometers directly southwest of the city of Mendoza. And of course, in Argentina, as we move south, we're moving further away from the equator and into cooler and cooler microclimates. Now, the Uco Valley can be divided into three subregions, and these can be further subdivided into a number of indicaciones geográficas, or IGs, or GIs, as we say in English. So from north to south, we have Tupungato, and then Tunuyán, and then San Carlos. So today's wine is taking us to Tupungato, so we're in the northern part of the Uco Valley, and this region is bordered to the south by the Las Tunas River and bordered to the north by the region of Luyan de Cuyo. And Tupungato is the largest of all the three regions in the Uco Valley. There's about just over 10,000 hectares here under vine. Now, if we drill down even further than that, as I mentioned at the top of this video, today's wine is taking us to the region of Gualtallary. And this is, by all accounts, the most famous region in the Uco Valley, if not perhaps even all of Argentina. The region spans about 2,250 hectares under vine. We are in the southern part of Tupungato, so we're bordered to the south by the Las Tunas River, and we're tucked up in the foothills of the Andes here. But technically, Gualtallary is not a GI, so this has been in progress for some time, but the major stumbling block here is this is a big region, and there's a ton of diversity in terms of microclimates. Altitude can range anywhere from 1,000 meters above sea level up to 1,600 meters above sea level. So we have a ton of different microclimates, different soils as well. And as a result, actually, producers are vying for actually there to be 5 distinct GIs here just in Gualtallary, which is pretty impressive. Now, considering how famous this region is, it's actually quite a young region. The first vines were only planted here back in 1992. It was previously thought that this region was far too cool for viticulture. But on that point, the winery that planted the first vines here was in fact Moët and Chandon, and they planted the vines for their sparkling wine project here in Argentina. Now, today's wine is coming from 2 hectares worth of vineyards, and they were planted in 2007. And the grower here is Tupungato Vinelands. Now, Zorzal has since planted their own vines at the estate, their own Cab Franc vines, of course, I should say, and they do see a lot of promise with this grape variety. Their first planting of Cab Franc was in 2016, and they planted 1.5 hectares. This came into production in 2019, and they've since doubled down. Noelia explained to me that they've added another 7 hectares of Cabernet Franc at the estate, which is pretty cool, and these were planted in 2020. So today's wine, getting back to it, this is grown at Tupungato Winelands, so this is in the northwest part of Gualtallary. So we're in a cooler zone in the region. We're at about 1,300 meters above sea level. That's around 4,300 feet above sea level. So altitude is the major cooling influence here. In addition to that, we have cooling breezes that do come down from the Andes. Now, in terms of soil across the board in the Uco Valley is of alluvial origin, and these are soils that are eroded materials from the Andes that were deposited here around 1 million years ago. What we're dealing with in this vineyard is predominantly a sandy silt mix, and there is a high percentage of these large calcareous stones in the vineyard as well. Now, from a winemaking perspective, Zorzal is the pioneer when it comes to the use of concrete eggs for fermentation. They started using concrete eggs in 2011. This wine is all from hand-picked fruit. It's all destemmed, but they do add about 10% of stems back into the fermenter. It's fermented with indigenous yeast, and it is fermented in the concrete eggs, as I mentioned. This spends about 40 days on skins, so a post-fermentation maceration of about 40 days. But during this time, there's no punch downs or pump overs. Because of the conical shape of these concrete eggs, there's no need for those sorts of cap management techniques. So this is in fact a gentler form of maceration. Now, once the maceration is complete, the wine is racked off the skins, and then the finished wine is then returned to concrete egg, where it ages on fine lees for about 10 months before it is bottled. So now, getting into the wine, I should remind everyone that, of course, we're dealing with high altitude Cabernet Franc here. And when we have high altitude Cab Franc, as we move up in altitude, we have a greater impact of solar radiation. So the sun gets stronger as we move up. And this means we will have berries that are a little bit smaller, thicker skins, higher skin to juice ratio. And this will lead to wines that will have a greater intensity of color, flavor, as well as tannin. Now, immediately on the nose, what jumps out of the glass is, reminds me of my childhood, black currant juice, so Ribena. It's very prominent on the nose, but there's this additional note of dusty wild blueberry. There's a bit of cherry here as well. But it does lean more fruit forward, and the fruits are riper on the sweeter side of the spectrum, darker fruits as well. But the pyrazines are there. But they're coming through for me as more of a herbal undertone, like a bit of sage. There's a touch of oregano here as well, and there's even just a little kiss of capsicum. But the fruit profile on the nose leans definitely more on the sweeter side of the spectrum, and definitely more fruit forward. The acidity on this wine is really quite surprising. It's very vibrant and very juicy. That black currant juice thing that I was getting on the nose follows through really nicely on the palate. And the palate is also quite spicy as well. There's a chili pepper note, there's a bit of black pepper, there's even a touch of clove here, but a very spicy palate, which is nice because it helps to offset and balance sort of those sweeter fruit notes on the nose as well as the palate. Now, in terms of the tannins, considering how much time this wine spent on skins, there's only a moderate amount of tannin. The tannins are nice and fine. They're nice ripe tannins. They're round. They finish with a nice velvety texture, which helps with a little bit of the grip. But the tannin profile is really nicely in balance, and by no means too big or too overdone or over extracted. Yeah, the mouthfeel is nice and supple, smooth, with just enough grip. And there is a slight, I hate to use the word viscosity, but there is a viscousness, there is a certain lusciousness to the palate, which stands to reason. Again, we're dealing with high altitude Cab Franc here, so there is more dry extract in the wine, which gives this weightier mouthfeel, but it's by no means heavy or tiresome. There's enough acidity here that helps to cleanse the palate and keep things moving in terms of that palate experience. Yeah, there's a nice bit of restraint here and balance and elegance, and I really quite like it actually. And these sorts of Cab Francs, in particular this one, I think it would be really great on a table. I think because of the fact that there's no wood here and there's that spiciness, great fruit profile, great acidity, I think this would be fantastic on a table. Makes me want to run down to the store and grab a skirt steak and make some chimichurri. But certainly I think this is a great food wine, and more importantly, I think that the wines like this are a fantastic introduction to Cabernet Franc as a great variety for perhaps a new consumer, because they are more fruit forward. They aren't quite as earthy or as savory because those pyrazines are kind of dialed back. And as a consumer, sometimes cool climate examples from the Loire or other places, these can be a bit too earthy for some consumers. So wines like this introduce them to the variety, introduce them to Cab Franc in a way that they find appealing, which just gives greater exposure to the grape as a whole. So I'm a big fan of wines like this, and the more I taste these wines, these Cab Francs from Argentina, the more I am excited about the future of the grape variety in this country. If you have a favorite Cab Franc from Argentina, let me know what it is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.